Hey folks, Andy Patton here, joined today by college hoops analyst Tobias Bass. Tobias and I are going to discuss LSU transfer Efton Reid, 2023 Gonzaga commit Dusty Stromer, and the rumors regarding Texas Tech transfer Kevin McCullar, all right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. And that is what we are going to be doing today. I am thrilled to be joined today by Tobias. Tobias is a recruiting analyst for the college hoops site Zagsblog. He also writes at NBC Sports Edge and was the big newsbreaker for Efton Reid's commitment to Gonzaga. Tobias, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show today.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So the Zags, their whole offseason has been kind of centered around who are they going to add to the front court. You know, we knew Chet Holmgren was going to be gone. We're still unsure on Drew Timme, but obviously he has declared for the NBA draft and at this time is quite possibly going to be moving on. The Zags were connected to Daz Amack. They were connected to Johnny Broome. They were connected to basically every big man that was out there in the portal. Ended up with Efton Reid. What can you tell me about who Efton Reid is and his fit in Spokane?
He's a former five-star recruit player. He's really, really talented. I don't think that he was able to display his full talent at LSU. You know, him coming in as a freshman, it is hard. It's definitely a big learning curve. But I think that, for some of the transfers that was available, this is probably the best pairing, I think, especially if Timme does decide to come back. I think that him and Timme will look really, really good together because I think a lot of people don't know Efton Reid can pass. He's a very good high IQ player. And I think that you could even see some potential high lows with him and Timme. Maybe Timme down low scoring the ball, or you could even see it the other way around. I think Efton Reid even has some ability where he can maybe even stretch the floor down the line. So I definitely like this fit for Gonzaga, and I think that you're seeing them go after a lot of defensive players. You know, over the last couple of years, I think people have said that, Gonzaga's soft, they can really score, but they're not tough enough. Well, they're getting some of these tough defensive-minded players. At least they're trying to go after them. So I think that you're going to see another really good Gonzaga team, maybe even a team that can even win the Natty.
Yeah, I think with Reid, the people who, weren't as familiar with college basketball, they looked up the numbers. The numbers certainly don't pop off the page the way that Amack's or Broome's numbers would have popped off the page. But I think you look at a guy who didn't do a ton of outside shooting, and I think that's the big concern that a lot of people have is like, can he stretch the floor? Like you said, if you watch some tape, he may not be a great outside shooter yet, but he has some feel away from the rim. He's not somebody that you just have to stick under the basket because, that would be an issue if Drew Timme were to return and these two guys both are just clogging up the middle of the lane. But I'm glad you mentioned that because I do think he looks like a player who's more capable of playing away from the rim than maybe his first season indicated.
Agreed.
I want to talk a little bit more about Gonzaga's developmental system. Obviously, we've talked so much about, the Zags have this tremendous reputation for churning out bigs who turn into absolute superstars. Kelly Olynyk is probably the most notable early example of that, but you've seen it with Brandon Clark, you've seen it with Kyle Wiltshire, you've seen it with even lesser known guys like Jonathan Williams. And now you're talking about a guy like Efton Reid, who he's probably not coming over to be a one and done guy who's here for one season and then looks to the NBA. Maybe that happens, in which case, great, probably more likely to happen if Drew Timme doesn't return. But do you think that the Gonzaga's kind of reputation for developing bigs was part of the reason that this fit made some sense for Reid?
Oh yeah, I think it had a big reason why. Look at the NBA bigs. They put in the NBA. You have Brandon Clark, you have Kelly Olynyk, you have Zach Collins. The list goes on and on, especially the last, let's say, decade or so.
Yeah.
So I think that he went to the perfect fit for him, someone that's going to develop him, take their time with him, but bring him up to speed, especially last year he didn't play as well as I think he wanted to. I think you're going to get a very motivated Efton Reid, which could be dangerous not only for the WCC but for the country as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. I think it was Gonzaga fans were starting to get a little restless because, we hadn't seen anybody coming into the roster. We had still have some tremendous uncertainty about who is leaving the roster. And I think that I kind of got the sense from some fans, at least, that people maybe viewed Reed as a bit more of a consolation prize to some of those other bigs who, Broom went to Auburn, obviously, Amac went to Texas Tech. But for me, it feels like he actually fits a little bit better, especially if Drew Timme returns. And we kind of touched on that a little bit. And I certainly don't know if you have any inside information on Timme, but I felt like this was a move that helps set the Zags up. Either way, whether Drew Timme returns or whether Drew Timme leaves, they kind of have a good option that works. Does that make sense? Does that feel kind of like how this could work with Reed?
I think that definitely makes sense. Whether Timme does or does not come back, you just set yourself up in a good spot because there's no guarantees in this sport. So you want to make sure you put yourself with your best foot forward. And he's, like I said, he's really talented. He's a player that you get him in the offseason, get him up to speed. You probably could even run offense through him at some point. Then you guys are going to have good guards. You're going to hopefully bring back some of them back. You have a couple of guys coming in. So I think that he's a nice fit whether he does or doesn't come back. But if Timme comes back, I mean, that pairing right there is going to be one of the best big man duos in the country.
Absolutely. I think they would be outstanding if they were paired together. You talked a little bit on the defense. I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit more because, again, people who are just learning about Efton Reid, this is, maybe the third or fourth time they've even heard his name, and now they're trying to figure out who is this guy, what's he going to look like. You look at the stats, you go to College Reference and you just look at the numbers. You're not getting a full picture of who he is because I think a lot of his impact, at least in his first season at LSU, and a lot of what his impact will be at Gonzaga is on the defensive end of the floor. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of athlete he is on that side of the floor?
I think that some people, they were nervous about the fouls. I think they saw his per 40. I think it was outrageous. But you look at any freshman bigs foul count, it's going to be high. I mean, it's a gigantic learning curve. He's going against guys that are more experienced, bigger, stronger, sometimes maybe even more athletic. So when they just rely strictly off their talent, they likely might foul. You look at even some of Gonzaga's bigs over the past couple of years, when they're freshmen, they're fouling a lot. It was that some of that number was in the sevens, but the per 48. So I think that he might not be the biggest, most explosive shot blocking athlete, and I don't think it's fair to compare him to a guy like Chet Holmgren. But I think that he can just be solid. He's 6'11", long arms, and he is a good athlete. I think that if you just show him just certain techniques, you're big, bro. You don't have to foul. You don't have to swipe down every time. Just keep your hands up. There's going to be a good contest pretty much anywhere, against any athlete you go against. So, and he has good instincts. So I think that if you get him in that offseason, get a little bit stronger, a little bit more confident, I think that he could be a plus defender for Gonzaga.
Absolutely. You mentioned the foul thing, and it makes me think of Zach Collins, who I think referees are still calling fouls on Zach Collins from the freshman year. He had so many issues with that, but Gonzaga has developed. I also think about Shemek Karnowski, a guy who was the foul machine when he was younger, and certainly he was a very big-bodied guy and had a hard time figuring out how to utilize his size. And Gonzaga has developed bigs to be good in that area so well. And obviously Chet Holmgren is a bit of an anomaly because he was good at it as a freshman, which is extraordinarily rare. But for Reed, like seeing him continue to develop in that way and potentially learning from Drew Timme, if not, obviously he's going to come in as not the most experienced big on the roster because they have Anton Watson, but he's certainly going to be the primary rim protector. And I'm not sure that he's fully ready for that responsibility in year two, but I think he's a guy that, like you said, the staff's got an entire summer to work with this guy to get him up to speed on what he can be defensively. And I think looking at what he did at LSU, I mean, the dude started 34 games for LSU. Like, we're not talking about a guy who's completely inexperienced. That's a lot of experience in the power conference, like against some really, really good teams. So I'm very excited to see what he can do on that end of the floor.
Yeah, and people forget he was on one of the best defensive teams in the country. I don't think they would have been starting him at center if they felt that he was such a liability defensively.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Tobias, thanks for joining me today to talk about Efton Reid. We're going to switch to talking about Dusty Stromer in the second segment, Gonzaga's latest addition to the class of first edition and latest addition to the class of 2023. So 1 hour after Gonzaga landed Efton Reid, they also landed Dusty Stromer. It was a very, very sleepy Sunday until suddenly it was not a sleepy Sunday for Gonzaga fans to land Reid and to land Stromer. We kind of knew both these things were coming down the pipeline. To have them happen one after another was, for me, as somebody who was about to do a Mailbag Monday episode, I was thrilled that we had some stuff to actually talk about. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about Stromer. 4-star combo guard, Sherman Oaks, California, has been connected to the Zags for a super long time. He felt to me like a Zag, not just because he's got the floppy hair that has come with so many other Gonzaga greats through the last 20 years, but certainly seems to have the game that fits with Gonzaga. What are your thoughts on his game?
I think he's a really confident shooting guard. He really can score. And what I like about him is just his poise. I saw him last summer for the 16s EYBL championship game against Drive Nation, one of the best teams in Texas. They were struggling down the lane. They were going a few minutes without scoring. And, that team is loaded. They had Jared McCain. They had Colin Boswell. They had a really good team. But he was able to make some big shots and big plays down the stretch to get to him for them to even win that game. So I definitely like his poise, and he just reeks with confidence. Sometimes people may say it's a bad thing, but in this sport of basketball, you have to be confident, and I don't think he lacks that in any stretch of the word. So I think that he'll be a good fit with the Zags. I don't think he'll be a 1 or maybe even a 2-and-done type of player. Maybe he could be there 3 or if not 4 years, but which is fine. Corey Kispert did something like that in a similar way. I think he'll kind of fit in that mold as far as how long he'll be there.
He compared himself to Corey Kispert too. I don't remember who he was speaking to, but I remember he was talking and he compared himself to Corey Kispert. He said that's kind of who he aspires to be. Obviously, Corey quite notably came back for his 4th year when he was probably going to get drafted after his junior year, or at least would have gotten signed. He came back, one of the few people who boosted significantly his draft stock into his senior year. So I don't know if that's going to be obviously the path for Dusty. It's way too early to tell, but the fact that he kind of wants to emulate somebody who did go on a 4-year plan is certainly some optimism for the Zags if they're fans who are looking to actually get some players who are going to stick around for a little bit. One of the things that Stromer mentioned as well was he talked about the fast-paced offense. So Gonzaga and Gonzaga's former assistant coach Tommy Lloyd at Arizona run the two of the fastest-paced offenses in college basketball. I'm curious your thoughts just on how that helps them from a recruiting perspective. Obviously, there are some ways that we have seen the fast pace for Gonzaga certainly trip them up. It tripped them up in the Arkansas game and has tripped them up in previous games as well. But for a kid like Stromer, do you think it makes the most sense to be in an offense with a little bit more creativity, allowing a little bit more free flowing for his game?
Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely helps him a lot. I mean, you look at even some of the offenses in the Big 12, some of the offenses, they're kind of boring to watch, and it's kind of first to score, first to 60 kind of wins, and a lot of kids don't want to play that way. It's not fun, especially coming from an offense where they didn't play like that. It's just a massive adjustment. So I think for Stromer, him playing with basically 2 5-star guards in the AAU, that he'll be prepared for that type of fast because they run a similar offense in there in AAU. They like to get up and down the floor. So I think that'll definitely prepare him well. And I can see it where he's probably a trailing a scenario, and whoever the point guard is at the time, they just kick it out to him for 3 after 3 after 3. So I definitely could see that being a scenario. So I think this offense fits him well, and it's a massive recruiting tool. I think that kids they want to play fast. So.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question, which is I've always thought that it was a pretty tremendous advantage for Gonzaga too, that, hey, you can come here, you can be a little bit more creative offensively. You can get out in transition, certainly for specific players. Obviously, Jalen Suggs was a great example, but even a guy like Ross Bolton, who transferred from Iowa State because he's super freaking fast and he wanted to just get up and down the court. And that was what kind of happened. So it feels to me like Gonzaga should be able to have some of these advantages. But at least this recruiting cycle has been really difficult for the Zags. They have 1 player committed in the class of 2022. That's 4-star forward Braden Huff, who's a stretch 4. Stromer's the first commit in the class of 2023. Obviously, he's a highly rated kid, so it's a nice pickup for them. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts as to why, or if it's maybe just a preference thing, if Gonzaga's being super picky about who they want in these next 2 recruiting classes. I also know that high school recruiting has just kind of taken a hit with what's going on with the transfer portal. So I'm wondering if it's some combination of those things, or if you have any other thoughts on maybe why Gonzaga seems to be not adding a whole lot of high school kids right now.
I think it's definitely a combination of things which you said. I think that a lot of colleges, they're about that portal life. They're really about that portal life. I was talking to a college coach in October. He was like, AT, don't send me any more high school kids. We're all about the portal. I was like, damn, it's October. He was like, no, we're about that portal. I was like, coach, kids aren't even in the portal. He said, trust me, they will be. And Lord and behold, they are. We have over 1,400 kids at one point that was in there. So I think it has something to do with that. And, Gonzaga, they do well with those older guards, especially at that position. That's a position where they like to get old, and it makes sense for you to old wins in college basketball. Past 20 years, we've only seen one team with predominantly freshman starters win. That was that Duke team with Justice Winslow and Jahlil Okafor. So with that being said, high school recruits, they're definitely going to be a part of it. And I think the transfer portal is a little bit blown out of proportion, but it's like the new pretty girl at school. She's hot, but once you get seeing her for a while, okay, we'll get over. But for right now, the transfer part is smoking hot, and that is going to be a big. I think it's changed college basketball like nothing we've ever seen before.
Yeah, it's been absolutely unreal this offseason to see, like you said, 1,400 kids in the portal before May 1st. It's been absolutely bananas. And I do wonder how much it's going to continue to impact those high school kids. Because like you said, the pendulum's probably going to swing back in another direction here soon. And eventually it'll level itself out, because this has been absolutely absurd. But part of my curiosity is, are we going to see more high school kids have to settle for going to, I say have to, settling for lower level Division I programs, when maybe in the past they would have gotten a Power 5 offer, and now they're going to go to play at a WCC school, or a lower level, an ASUN school or something like that. And then after one or two very excellent seasons, they're just going to move on. And it's kind of a bummer for those mid-major schools, but it feels to me like that might be the direction we're headed, unless, of course, somebody actually wakes up and starts to implement some policy here.
Yeah. I think, to answer your question, if I was a mid-major, you're not those top 100 kids, those upper echelon ones, they'll be fine.
Yeah.
But if you're a mid-major and you're those high 3-star, maybe even a low 4-star, I think you may have a chance, especially with all these coaching changes. I'm actually trying to help a kid now. He had a Mississippi State, Florida Gulf Coast, Ole Miss, Georgia off out of high school. All those colleges, they had coaching changes. So he's kind of stuck in limbo, and he's a 2022. So he's trying to find a school right now. And I told him, I get it's not the most ideal, but one, we have to be self-aware. That's in any aspect of life, one. But then two, you may have to go down a level. Instead of you going to Georgia, you might have to go to Georgia State.
Right.
That might be, your path. I said everyone's path is different, but I said they're all about that part of life, bro. Georgia State is losing players. They're losing players. I said you probably can go into a program like that and probably play immediately. So I said you have to keep those things in mind. So I do think that it may affect some people's decisions. And I tweeted about it a couple of months ago. I said, I think you're going to see a bunch of 2023s come off the board early, and they are, because, if you have a school in mind, I would commit, because if something happens that you can't foresee, you might not be able to go to their schools anymore. A Memphis might get a Kendrick Davis. They may not want you anymore. That's real. So if you have a school, then that may be the fit for you. I would probably go ahead and commit. It might not be a better option for you coming soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes so much sense for these kids to just get somewhere, because it's so much easier to move. And we say easier in the sense that you don't have to sit out a year, but it's not easy to uproot your life and transfer your credits. And some of that stuff is complicated, obviously, but I could understand okay, I'm just going to go to Georgia State and I'm going to, average 17 a game as a freshman. And then look at how many options kids like that. Look at Johnny Bloom. He's at Morehead State. He has a couple good years, and now he could have gone anywhere. He could have gone anywhere. Dawes Amack could have gone anywhere. And it took those guys a couple years to develop, but there are plenty of dudes who are having one good season at a mid-major, and then their options just become endless. And I think this will probably change eventually. I'm not sure how it's going to shake out, but it seems to make sense to me that some of these kids are just going to be like, well, I'm just going to go dominate for one. It's basically, it's not an extra year of high school, but it's another year that teams get to look at you in a different setting. And then maybe you can go be a little bit more attractive to some of those big programs.
I'll even do this. I won't give any names. There are certain schools, they're telling kids, hey, come to my program for a year. You can transfer after. They're using the portal in a different. They're flipping it on the kid. Oh, you can come to such and such school with me, and we'll put you. You're going to play immediately. You're going to do all these things. Then you can transfer. We just want you here for a year. Some kids, that some programming, it's more than you think. They're using it as a recruiting tool. So I think that if I'm a mid-major, of course you want them to stay longer, but
Right.
you may have a shot with a higher recruited kid simply just because he may not have somewhere to go.
Right. Well, and it makes sense too if you're a coach and your biggest aspiration is to win as many games as possible and to make the NCAA tournament. Like
Right.
WCC is maybe not a great example because it's really hard to make the NCAA tournament out of that conference.
Right.
But if you're in the, if you're in the even like the Big Sky or the Big West, I'm West Coast guy, so obviously I'm thinking out here. But like if you could just bring in 2 or 3 higher level recruits than you normally get, your chances of going to the NCAA tournament explode. They go up really high.
Right.
Yeah, you might lose all those kids the next year, but if you do that 2-3 years in a row, then as a coach, you're like, now I'm going to, then it's my turn. I'm going to go somewhere else. I don't know that that's great for like you college basketball in general. I don't know if it's good for like fans of that team are probably not loving like, hey, for 3 years, I didn't recognize anybody on the team and then the coach left. Like that's probably not great. But I can understand why a coach would want to do that. Like that makes sense to me. The system right now is set up for them to do that.
Yeah, no, definitely set up like that. Like I said before, I think that it's blown a little out of proportion, but it's just so. I mean, you even look at the NCAA tournament, like the championship game. You had there were 2 players that transferred that played significant minutes. You had Brady Manick and Remy Martin. Everyone else was pretty much there for however many years they were there. There wasn't that many. I think Villanova, they were in the Final Four. They didn't have any.
Yeah.
So you look at it from that perspective. So you got 2 kids, and then Remy Martin, he struggled, and some of that was due to injury, but he came off the bench.
Right. Yeah.
In the perfect world, he would have started because he wasn't hurt. But nonetheless, with the circumstances that happened, he struggled. He was hurt. He came off the bench. So you have a transfer portal that started and 1 kid that comes off the bench. So there goes that. I could use it as an example of why I think it could be overrated as of today.
That makes sense. All right, Tobias, we're going to come back in the 3rd segment. We're going to talk about another transfer. We're going to talk about Texas Tech's Kevin McCullar. He's been connected to Gonzaga. We're going to talk about that fit there, what that might look like. Before we get there, though, I want to tell the listeners about today's sponsor, BetOnline. The 2022 NCAA tournament is in the books with the win secured by Bill Self and the Jayhawks of Kansas. While the Zags unfortunately fell short of the game's final week, that does not mean fans cannot remain in on the action. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still here with Tobias Bass. Tobias, Efton Reid committed, Dusty Stromer committed within an hour of each other on Sunday afternoon. And then shortly after that, you had a tweet indicating that Kevin McCullar, a 6'6" wing from Texas Tech, who's in the NBA draft, he is declared he is looking at a professional route, but he has indicated if he is returning to college, it is going to be one of 2 programs, Gonzaga and Kansas. Can you give me a little bit on who this kid is for fans who maybe haven't seen him outside of maybe 1 or 2 games, just what kind of player he is?
I mean, he's a grinder. I remember when he first got to Texas campus, I think he got there a year early. Man, I'm not gonna lie to you, Andy. He was bad. There was no way I thought that he was going to be able to play in the Big 12. He really, really struggled, but I respect him. I mean, he stayed and he really worked his butt off, and he just got better and he got better. His confidence grew, and then now he's become a really good player for Texas Tech. He'll even make some money playing basketball one day. But he's a really good defender. He can play multiple positions. Good finisher around the back. He's a really high IQ kid. I think that if he was to go to Gonzaga, I think he'd be a really, really good player. I know he wants to take a little bit more shots. I think he wants to play predominantly point guard as well. So that'll be something to keep an eye out for. But I've been told as of today, I think he's leaning towards Kansas, which would make sense. They need a veteran guard. They don't have any. They have a bunch of redshirt guys. So I think as of today, I think he's leaning towards Kansas. But on the flip side is if he goes there, I think Tyrese Hunter would. I think that he would be. I think I could see him going to Gonzaga. I could see that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was going to ask with McCullar before we get into Tyrese Hunter, which was my final topic. Do you think he's more? It sounds like Kansas over Gonzaga at this point, but do you think he's leaning staying in the? Obviously, he hasn't gotten all of the intel he's going to get from NBA scouts. He's got until I believe June 1st to make a decision in that regard. But do you think he's the kind of guy who's got a realistic shot at getting drafted, or is it more likely that he would be an undrafted guy, or more likely that he returns to school and tries to work on some of that stuff before trying it out next year?
I think he has a shot to get drafted. I think this draft is very top heavy. I think those middle guys, even in the I think it's kind of just a wash. So I've been told that he's been going up board slowly. As of today, he'd be like a late second round pick. But I can see him getting drafted. It just kind of depends on what position he's going to be, and I'm guessing they're marketing him as a point guard. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So the other question with McCullar is how his fit would look at Gonzaga, and it kind of depends on Julian Strawther, another guy who's in the draft, who's a similar size, although obviously he doesn't play point guard. He's more distinctly a wing. Do you think that there's a fit for McCullar if Strawther returns? Do you think it would only happen if he doesn't return? You mentioned he could play some point guard. Obviously, the Zags are probably hoping that Nolan Hickman or potentially Tyrese Hunter will be the primary point guard next year.
I think that he could play with Strawther. I think he came out. He's versatile. I mean, he played pretty much 1 through 4 at certain times with Tech. So I think that he could play all those positions. I think it would just kind of be what he want to do that, or what would Coach Few want him to do specifically. I do know he wants to take on more responsibility as a ball handler. So I think that he could do it. But I think in you guys' offense, you guys would have more than one guard that could bring it up and run the offense. So he would just have to be okay with that. But I think between Kansas or Gonzaga, he would have to do it, and he understands that. So I think that he definitely could fit in with Strawther if he decided to come back.
Yeah. Gonzaga, the two teams that they've had that have gone to the national championship have started 2 point guards.
Right,
so they're very familiar with doing that if they need to, which actually kind of leads to the last point. If McCullar doesn't come to Gonzaga, or even if he does, I suppose the Zags still have a realistic chance of landing Tyrese Hunter from Iowa State. I've talked about him a handful of times already on the podcast. Fans are very interested in what he would bring to this team. He's not, at least he was not as a freshman, a particularly great outside shooter, but he's an incredible distributor. He's got his steal numbers are really, really high, a decent score as well. For a team that has started multiple point guards in the past, do you think there is a way the Zags could utilize Hunter in a way alongside Nolan Hickman, alongside Hunter Salas, who's more of a combo guard? Do you think they could find a way to make that work, or is there a potential logjam situation if Hunter wanted to come to GU?
Yeah, I think they can make it work. And man, if you could put Hickman and Silas and Hunter somewhere, God, that would be tough. That would be amazing. I would love to see this as a fan of the game, but I think that they could work. I think he has some Monte Morris in this game. I got to see him play in person a couple of times, especially during the pandemic when he was a senior. He's a really good player. He can shoot a little bit. He can shoot a little bit better than he showed this year. So I think he'll come back as a much improved jump shooter. But I think it'll work. And I think they would just be really that would be really, really hard to stop. That would be they would really be dynamic in the half court.
So where do you kind of reading the tea leaves on Tyrese Hunter right now? I know you mentioned it kind of might depend a little bit what McCullar's doing, but kind of do you have a sense on what Hunter's kind of looking at when looking for his next team?
I mean Kansas and Gonzaga. I think it may be kind of a race almost. I wonder maybe who commits first type of thing. I can see that, but I know he posted a list earlier, but for me to make the most sense would be Kansas and Gonzaga. Kansas needs a more experienced guard, even though he's still very young. He's played a lot of minutes, so I think that he could go over there and fit in immediately, and I think he could also fit in with Gonzaga. I just think it'll be a flip coin, whichever one goes to the school, y'all would get the other.
Absolutely. So if the Zags are getting one of those two guys, and they already secured Efton Reid, looking ahead to next season's roster, obviously. It's still too early to tell. Even if we know those two things, I'm guessing Roz Bolton's probably not coming back, but I don't know for sure. I'm guessing Julian Strawther is coming back, but again, don't have a specific intel there. Drew Timme is a legitimate toss-up to me. I think it's 50-50 at this point. But based on who we think is going to be back, who might or may not be back, like these rumors that Gonzaga's, that the window's closing, things like that, they're a little overblown, right? Like this team's still going to be pretty darn good next year.
They're going to be very good. I think those rumors are definitely when they're going to win their conference. I think they're still going to be a top 2-3 seed for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this team's still really well equipped.
Yeah.
Tobias, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate you taking the time for helping us out with some of the Efton Reid rumors, getting that secured. I'm really happy that he's coming to campus, that you took the time to come on the show to talk about these guys. Before I let you go, is there a place that people who are listening to the show who maybe are not familiar with your work, where they can find you on social media, where they can find your work and follow you along?
You can follow me on Twitter at Tobias_Bass. I'll probably be doing some player interviews with some of your favorite top 100 recruits this summer, just breaking down their games and just getting an idea of where they're going to go. I'm actually probably going to be switching jobs soon. I'll make it out of Bass Bomb whenever it's time, but that'll be coming out soon. So you'll see most of my work on that new platform as well.
Oh, well, I'm excited to hear about the new Bass Bomb then. That's coming soon. So Tobias, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show, folks. We got a ton more great stuff coming this week. More interviews, more talk on Efton Reid, more talk on Dusty Stromer right here on the Locked On Zags podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube as well. All right. Thank you all for listening, and go Zags.